guys, Veronica here. Yeah, I'm still here for a few more days, and I've been thinking the last couple of days if there was anything that I really wanted to cover in this space before I left, and realized looking around that we didn't talk about what's going to happen with the cover crops when they get to this stage. So if you've been following along all season, you know we've been talking about cover crops nonstop, building soil, providing food and habitat for wildlife, providing a deterrent from your main crops. And now my cover crops are at this stage where this high diversity of seeds and flowers are coming off of them, and to leave you hanging in this space without any sort of instruction or, method to my madness after guiding you this far just seems to be a disservice. So I'm going to talk about what I'm doing here before I leave and start heading east. Now, as you can see, there are lots of flowers and lots of seed heads behind me. And one of the main things I think that main considerations really that I make in determining what I'm going to do with all of these various wildness in the garden is what's growing next, what seeds do I want to save, and what seeds am I happy sort of composting back in place, because this is like me being super budget always. So there's a couple schools of thought. We're going to back up a little. There's a couple schools of thought when it comes to cover cropping. And the main school of thought when it comes to cover cropping is that you plant the seeds, you grow them until they're right at that bloom phase, right at that like starting to produce and convert phase, and then you cut them all back or you till them all in, and all of this puts life back into the soil in the form of organic matter as a food source. Now, that method is great for building soil, and I definitely encourage it in most, skill applications. But if you're on a super tight budget and you don't see any disease issues, one of the things that I like to do in that space is to let the natural cycle progress. And so it is letting these plants go to seed and then cutting it all back and letting those seeds reseed in place so that you have basically the same soil building mechanisms come back the following year without having to reseed again. Now, this is not like a perfect science, and it's probably not actually a school of thought other than my own. Maybe it is, I don't know, but it's something that I do because I really like volunteers. And so I find that volunteers tend to come up bigger and stronger. They tend to be a little more disease and pest resistant, and they're just like a really fun surprise to have in the garden. And so what I'll do is I'll go through and just chop and drop all of this once the seeds have formed to a point where I know they're going to basically resow themselves. Now, if you do it too early and the seeds are not formed yet, you're going to have some problems with them resprouting. It's not going to mean that it's like any worse of a mulch or a soil amendment, but if they've come that far, you might as well let them finish it out and then get to a point where they can resprout again. So we're going to talk about what that stage looks like because it's not always clear. But for the most part, and I'll pull a couple of examples here because I have all these wild radish pods and turnip pods. For the most part, it's pretty clear. So when it comes to things like these radishes and turnips, you'll see the pods start to get really big and fat, like these guys at the bottom. When they're like tiny and skinny, like these ones at the top, or still in the flower stage or just out of the flower stage, there's not really much of a seed in there. But as they get bigger and fatter, and you can kind of hear, I don't know if you can hear that, it's kind of like crunchy, that's when the seed's going to start forming inside. Now, you don't want to open it and save those seeds when they're green, because what happens is the seed shrivels too quickly and then it's not going to germinate as well. So I just let them dry in the pods. I let the pods hit the ground. I am literally cutting everything down, and then it's going to spring back next year. And whoever's here next is going to be a little confused as to why there's such a high diversity of species in this part of the yard. Maybe they won't be that confused, but I think it's a fun surprise. So anyway, radish and turnip pods and any other pods that look like this, you want them to get nice and big and fat. The pods that I have right here in front of me, and I think these guys are pretty close. A lot of times if you're saving for seed, like if you actually want to save for seed, you want them to be dry or close to dry, or something is getting like crunchy and dry at maybe the base of the plant. You start seeing yellowing. But if you're just cutting them back, for nature to do as she will with them, then as long as the pods are like fat and you start to see the seeds filling out on some of them, you should be good to go. So this is the arugula. Let's see if I get that to focus a little better. Nope. Okay, so you can see, I'll pop one of these off. This pod is pretty good and fat. You can see it's getting kind of bumpy. That's definitely a sign that we're looking for. And you can always, you can always pop one open and look. You can sort of see, yeah, those little green BBs inside. So those are pretty much full-size arugula now. Again, we're letting them dry in the pods and then crushing them if you're saving seeds, but if you're not, dropping this to the ground is not going to hurt anything. This again is only if you really need the space in these rows. If you want to use your covers as mulch for whatever you're planting in, maybe you're putting in some melons, maybe you're putting in, some really late tomatoes, I don't know, whatever zone you're in, it helps to mulch for summer, right? So we might as well mulch with things that have seed heads, so then when fall comes and maybe a little bit of rain comes, all of these covers spring up again without any additional effort. And so that is like the beauty of eating your yard. The other beauty of eating your yard is that some things don't go to seed immediately. And so like these are turnips that I picked earlier because I love turnips. If you don't love turnips, you might not enjoy eating cover crops as much as I do, but I've been eating turnips. I've been eating, well, this guy doesn't have any because we pulled most of them, but fava beans. This has some flowers. You can eat the greens too. But I've been eating basically a lot of cover crops, to be honest, especially now that I've moved a lot of plants out of here to rehome them so that they don't just like totally die not attended. But what other seeds can I show you? The grains, I have a feeling these guys are fully developed. I'm still learning about grains. But basically what you're looking for with any sort of seed head, whether you're saving it or chopping it, if you're letting it go to seed versus cutting covers when you're supposed to, is really plump, well filled out like seeds or seed capsules or seed pods or all of the various things that encapsulate the seeds that we plant. Like you're learning this full life cycle now and learning to watch for these things. And when you start seeing them begin to fill out really well, that's when I go through and start chopping and dropping. Now, you can do it sooner, again, but once you've started into that seed production phase with most cover crops, I don't see a huge variance in terms of, doing it right at the beginning of that phase and being like, oh, I missed the good window, and doing it after seeds are produced and then letting them reseed. If anything, I think the latter is better, to be honest, because then you don't have to buy seeds again. And you're already working with seeds adapted to your region. So again, it's just figuring out what your goals are, what you're trying to achieve, thinking through that process flow. My goal at all times with these cover crops especially is to plant in thirds in terms of like who I'm thinking about, like what these things are for. And so a third of it is for me and whoever else I'm feeding. A third of it is for wildlife and whatever else is needing some form of food and appreciates the various things I've planted, and a third of it's for the soil. And so if you think sort of in those terms, and it's not trying to like make massive gains in any direction on one year to the next, but really more about exponential rollout across the seasons, on a longer term scale, then you're going to be okay in your garden and your soil is going to improve, and you're not going to have to spend like a ton of money or time making this sort of stuff happen every season. It's sort of like set the parameters from the get-go, set your outline, your framework from the get-go, get a process in place, and then once it's all laid out in a way that like is constructive and makes sense and is supportive of you and your ecology both above and below ground, then you're really set, like you're good to go from there. So I highly encourage you to think a lot more about process in your planning if you don't already, and think about ecological processes too, because once you start getting into the rhythms of the seasons, of how can you best support your ecology and your environment, and then also how can you save money on seeds and be a part of that solution, then you're going to be golden when it comes to both soil building and growing better food for yourself. So with that, we are going to close this Eat Your Yard segment and series, and I will be moving on, heading way far east this week. If you have any questions, I will do my best to get to them, but I'm going to be on the road, so I don't have any promises. But please leave them in the comments below regardless, because I'm sure that there'll be moments here and there. If you like what you see, hit that subscribe button, ding that bell, and follow me on Instagram at FlavorKit for all this sort of stuff and more. Like I said, I'm going to be on the road, and that's probably where the updates are going to be honest. So Instagram, and until next time, happy gardening.